Hey everybody, Jeff Schneider here. If you're new to this channel, we usually talk about chord theory and soloing tips for musicians. But today, we're diving into something a bit different, and that is how the principles of jazz improvisation have transformed not just my music, but my approach to speaking. Each one of these principles builds on the last and will significantly enhance how you communicate and connect with others too. So let's dive in. Let's start with a story. I'm 21 years old, and I'm playing piano in this lobby, and there's no one listening. It's just me and this band at this really boring gig. And to make matters worse, the saxophone player who's taking a solo has just been going on and on and on. So I look over to the band, the rest of my band, and we kind of exchange this glance, and we're gonna have some fun. So we decide at the top of the chorus that we're gonna modulate, we're gonna transpose everything up a half step. We're gonna change keys in the middle of this guy's solo. And so we do, and he has no idea. He is completely oblivious to the fact that we've transposed all the chords, and now every note that he's playing is clashing with the chords that we're playing, and he's completely clueless. We finish the song and he doesn't mention a thing. Which brings us to the first principle, and that is the importance of listening. Now, obviously when it comes to talking with somebody, you wanna be listening to what they're saying, but it's not just listening with your ears, right? It's with your eyes. It's awareness is really what's at the heart of this lesson, and that is being aware of where your audience is at. Are they shifting in their seats? Are they looking off instead of looking at you? And if that's the case, well, that's actually a good thing, because at least you're aware that's the case. And you're not like that saxophone player who was just completely in the clouds there. So the other good news is that the second principle we're going to talk about is how to get your audience back to where they're paying attention to you instead of thinking about lunch or whatever else. So let's get on to principle number 2. And I learned this one at a young age as well, in the soloing context at least. I was in high school taking the saxophone lesson. I was the one playing saxophone this time, and my teacher was playing piano. And I was improvising a solo on this jazz standard called Stella by Starlight. And when I went to the bridge, about halfway through the tune, I started playing a bit louder. And I didn't think anything of it, but at the end of the solo, my teacher turns to me and he's like, "Wow, Jeff, that was really, really great." And I was taken aback. I had to ask him, like, why? I mean, I didn't remember playing any cool licks or lines or anything. And he said, well, when you went to the bridge and you played louder, you played a little bit higher, there was a real shift in dynamics, and that contrast was really effective. At the core there of that lesson was the importance, not just of contrast, but in a greater sense, how I played rather than the notes that I played themselves. The second principle is how is more important than what. How you say it is more important than what you say. And the way that you improve how you say something is by working on what we call in the music world phrasing. And phrasing is, it's how you play something. It's how loud you play it, how soft you play it. Do you use a harsh articulation? Are you a bit softer? It could also have to do with pacing. Are you leaving space? Are you playing or speaking at a faster pace? Lots of different ways to change things up, but the important thing is the contrast between those two dynamics or those two ways of playing. That's how it gets to be an effective skill or an effective technique. There has to be contrast. Principle 2.1 is contrast is king. If you remember that and you remember to introduce contrast into how you play, everything you play, or rather everything that you say, since we're talking about speaking, is going to have such a greater effect. But unfortunately, a lot of people run into problems when they try to implement principle number 2. But luckily, principle number 3 will solve the problem. So let me first explain what I'm talking about here. And I'll use another story. I'm playing in a big band rehearsal. I'm playing saxophone. And during this rehearsal, I had a solo, and I knew before playing the solo that I wanted to work on phrasing, specifically on space and leaving space. So I put my phone on my music stand and hit record so I could listen back to the solo after the rehearsal. And I went to take the solo, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna leave space, and it felt uncomfortable to not play during the solo. But when the rehearsal ended and I was able to listen to the recording, it was as if I didn't leave any space at all. In the moment, it felt like this eternity, but in actuality, in reality, it was barely any time. And so the principle number 3 is that your perception does not equal reality, or in other words, does not necessarily equal the audience's perception. If you're working on pausing during a presentation or while you're speaking, 3 seconds might actually feel like 10 or 15. It might feel like an eternity. And by the way, if you're on a stage and there's a spotlight shining on you and there's lots of people in the room, that's gonna skew your perception even more so. So you have to be aware of that bias and know that exaggeration is really effective for getting your final performance to be the way you actually want it to be. It's true for soloing and it's true for speaking. So we've talked about the importance of listening and awareness. And we've talked about the importance of phrasing and contrast. And we've talked about how perception does not equal reality. Well, the 4th principle is a little bit different. We're gonna get into the what you're saying. When I first learned to improvise, I was very obsessed with learning the chords and the scales and the arpeggios and the music theory. And so I could play notes that fit the harmony, but there wasn't any melody. There wasn't any what I call a horizontal component. I was playing the chord changes, which is very vertical. I was playing the right notes, but there was nothing stringing them together. And because I wasn't focused on melody at all, nothing I played was that meaningful or memorable. And the same is true for speaking, but you might be wondering, well, what is melody with speaking? Are you talking about like a sing-songy voice? And no, I'm not, because that would be more like a phrasing thing. I'm talking about stories and storytelling. Stories are the melody of speaking. Stories equal melody, melody equals story. And the analogy is really, really effective here, because if you think about a lot of people who talk about something, like they might be really, really smart and they talk about a subject and it's clear that they know a lot. That's like me as an early improviser playing the notes that fit the chords where everything is correct, but there's no through line. There's nothing that's connecting with the audience. Even in this video that I'm doing here, I'm trying to integrate a lot of stories because they're a lot more meaningful and memorable than just me spewing out these principles. We connect with stories just like we connect with melodies. Anyway, we've got one more principle to cover, and it might be the most important one, because without this principle, the other 4 are gonna be really tough to implement. If you wanna work on your phrasing, if you wanna work on contrast, on slowing down, on implementing stories, if you wanna do any of that stuff, it's really important to practice one thing at a time. I think of it like spinning plates. One plate is dynamics, like how soft or loud you speak. Another plate might be body language, how you're moving your hands. Another plate might be listening and paying attention to your audience. Another plate might be applying a story. There's so many different things to think about when you're speaking and practicing speaking that if you don't focus on one thing, you're gonna drop all the plates. They're all gonna fall down. So spin one plate at a time, especially when you're practicing. And yeah, that might mean that the other stuff that you know you wanna work on at some point doesn't go so well. Like you might work on your dynamics and work on contrast between soft and loud. And then you might listen back to that recording and hear, oh yeah, but I was talking too fast the whole time. That's fine, that's not what you were working on. You have to focus on one thing at a time, because if you try to focus on too much, you're not gonna get any of it done. So hopefully these 5 principles are helpful to you. If you guys enjoyed this content, let me know. I know it's a little bit different, but this is something I'm super interested in and passionate about. So I hope you enjoyed the video. That's it for now. So see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.